So, good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the third workshop of our Nature-Based Solution Policy Business Forum. So, we will discuss today about NBS private sector upscaling and capacity building. My name is Anna Skolobig. I am a senior researcher at the Institute of Environmental Sciences at the University of Geneva. And I will be moderating this event together with several colleagues from the University of Geneva. We have here Julia Aguilera and Professor Jörg Balsiger. From the International Institute of Applied System Analysis, we have Joan Bayer, Juliette Martin, Alberto Fresolone, and Jenan Irshaid. We have from Steinbest Europe's Centrum, Victoria Blessing. And from ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, Adriana Duarte and Nea Pakarinen. So this is the organizing team, and our expectation of this workshop is to better understand what is the potential for firms and for the private sector specializing in nature-based solutions across Europe. What barriers and opportunities do these firms see and encounter in their everyday work? And what capacities needs to be built and what policies are already in place that hinder or support NBS private sector upscaling? So this is a third of a series of workshops that aim at bringing together policy and business actors to discuss options to move forward as fast as possible the nature-based solution agenda. So for me, it's really a pleasure to see again many attendees of past year's events, but also to welcome many new participants. Because of the number of participants, we do not have really time for one-to-one introductions now, but I would really like to invite you all to write your name and belonging in the chat. So I give you just a few seconds now for this as a way to introduce everybody to everybody else somehow. But yeah, in interest of time, I will also just briefly mention that this event would not be possible without the support and the organization that has happened in the framework of two different projects funded by the European Commission. One is PHUSICOS and the other one is NetworkNature. And I will now briefly give the floor to my colleague, Joan Bayer, that will say a few words about PHUSICOS.
Okay, thank you, Anna, and welcome everybody on behalf of the PHUSICOS project. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a Horizon 2020 project. It's a research and innovation project, and its core feature is that the project is actually carrying out the design and construction of nature-based solutions in 5 separate sites in rural mountain areas. It's coming soon to a close, and it's been a challenge. I think we've all learned a huge amount about the challenges of actually getting NBSs on the ground. But I think, now with actually quite a lot of success. So really it's been a very rewarding project. Partly it's, I think some of the features of it is one, the living labs, where we really tried hard to co-create these solutions. There's 15 partners in PHUSICOS, mainly research organizations and public authorities. So welcome from part of PHUSICOS.
Thank you, Joanna. Now I give the floor to Victoria Blessing that will welcome you from the side of NetworkNature.
Yes, good morning, everyone. So warm welcome also from my side. I'm Victoria Blessing and I work at the Steinbest Zentrum in Germany. And I am here representing the project NetworkNature. And we are a coordination and support action. And what we are doing in our project is striving to synthesize and strengthen the NBS evidence base. And because we're a CSA, we do that by including the work of all you're doing, in some of you, in the Horizon 2020 projects, over 30 of them. We engage existing stakeholders and expand the NBS community. We also ensure that NBS science informs the policy agenda, but also vice versa. And we strive to accelerate the uptake of NBS. So basically, our goal is to create opportunities to maximize both the impact and also the spread of NBS. And we do this with 5 partners, and actually 3 of them are present today in different roles. So there's me, then there's Adriana from ICLE, who's doing the technical side, and also Dorsa from IUCN, who will do a presentation later. So we're here in full force today. From the Steinbeiß-Europa-Zentrum side, our role in the project focuses on the business aspects, and that includes supporting the private sector and especially SMEs. So that's why we, for this, teamed up with the PHUSICOS project and the colleagues there for this online event. And for NetworkNature, we have a webinar series, and for us, that is part of the webinar series as well. That's all from my side for now, and I'm passing on the word to Anna.
Thank you, Victoria and Joanna. So without further ado, we were going straight away to the presentations. Let me just say that the workshop is structured around 2 sessions. So for us to facilitate in the best possible way this dialogue and discussions around nature-based solution enterprises capacities, we will begin with the presentation providing us an overview of nature-based enterprises, what are the enablers, the barriers, how they can be defined in the first place as well. Then we will have a thematic discussion, and we will really divide in breakout rooms and try to get a better understanding about your perspectives, your opinions on how can we develop capacities for nature-based enterprises. The second part of the workshop is dedicated to really showcase cases of nature-based enterprises. So we will hear from people belonging to such enterprises, what are their challenges that they face in their everyday work. We will hear also from a reinsurance company, from Swiss Re, what is their experience, and then discuss on how we can de-risk a nature-based solution. Then it's really the time has come to introduce the first of our speakers. We deeply thank all these 5 speakers that we have. I thank them collectively now because they really have been following and preparing their presentation, and they will be with us also during the breakout sessions to address your questions. Just before I go on, the housekeeping rules are copied in the chat, so you can read them there, but feel free to ask questions or put into the chat your reflections anytime. We will pick them up either during the main session or during the breakout sessions later on. Okay, so it's really now the time to introduce Esme. Esme Koyman is a researcher on entrepreneurship, financing, and business model for nature-based solution at the Trinity College in Dublin. She works with cities and organizations in European-funded projects connecting nature and Go Green routes. She develops strategies and tools to support the implementation of nature-based solution, and next to this, she's managing the Connecting Nature Enterprise platform, which is the world's biggest community for nature-based enterprises. Her presentation today will focus on nature-based enterprises definition, barriers, and enabler. Esme, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you for that introduction, and good morning, everybody. Let's share my screen and then put it in presentation. Yes. Second. Yes. Yeah, so good morning, everybody. So as Anna said already, my presentation is going to be about nature-based enterprises, their definition, their barriers and enablers. So a quick word about my workplace. So I work in Trinity College Dublin, and specifically in the Trinity Centre for Social Innovation. And we are part of the business school, but our activities very much focus on making a positive impact on society and the environment. And we are therefore also active in a few projects related to nature-based solutions. So yeah, to mention, yeah, Go Green Roots in the NBS EduWorld UForest, but kind of the most relevant project for this research that I'm presenting today is Connecting Nature. So just a few words about Connecting Nature. So the aim of this project was to find new ways to implement nature-based solutions in 10 different cities, together with citizens and for the local economy. And one of the kind of the results was the Connecting Nature framework, and this is a process tool for the implementation of nature-based solutions. So you can see that here on the slide. And just to say, this tool consists of like 3 phases: so the planning, delivery, and stewardship of nature-based solutions. And each of these phases has 7 elements, of which nature-based enterprises is one. So then why was entrepreneurship included in that kind of framework? So we found that in Connecting Nature cities, there were quite some challenges related to the implementation of urban and nature-based solutions. So the solutions that were implemented in Connecting Nature were mainly urban parks, but also urban gardens, natural playgrounds, and kind of green installations. But we found that there was kind of in almost every city, there was kind of a lack of collaboration with the private sector and with communities. But there also was a general lack of funding for NBS. It was very difficult for them to find the financing for it. And then also mainly on the longer term. So looking at kind of the sustainable business model of the nature-based solution, and kind of more in the maintenance and stewardship phase. And then lastly, there was also a challenge of finding skilled and experienced suppliers of those NBS, that kind of companies or businesses that could actually implement, help them implement these NBS. But we also saw that these challenges could lead to some interesting opportunities for businesses and for private sector organizations. So that's why we kind of started this research on nature-based entrepreneurship. So enterprises delivering nature-based solutions. So we kind of define nature-based enterprises as enterprises that are driven by a mission to work with and for nature to address climate change and biodiversity challenges. And with this, they can deliver nature-based solutions, and they can kind of support in each of these phases of the implementation of nature-based solutions. So the planning, delivery, and stewardship. And moreover, because they kind of implement nature-based solutions, they can also support in delivering climate change and biodiversity policy, of course, and generate more benefits for local economies. So a quick word on what kind of on the research we did. So the research was led by Trinity College Dublin, and in the Connecting Nature project, as I mentioned before, and we mainly looked at kind of the definition and the economic activities that nature-based enterprises do, and then the kind of the mission orientation, and then looked into kind of what are the external barriers, so the barriers from the kind of the environment, and then the internal barriers and enablers, and the internal barriers are more the organization itself. So the kind of the methods were, we looked at a systematic review of the literature. Then we did a survey of 148 nature-based enterprises, asking them tons of questions. I think we had 60 questions, so that was quite a lot. And then we also did semi-structured interviews with 22 enterprises to get a bit more in-depth information from them. And now on to the results. So we found that nature-based enterprises are engaged in economic activities, and that these activities can be kind of directly or indirectly related to nature and nature-based solutions. So the activities in green are kind of the directly related. So we have like ecosystem restoration and management, water management, green buildings, sustainable tourism, health and well-being. That can kind of include any type of nature therapy. then agriculture, sustainable forestry, and kind of NBS for public spaces. And then we also found some indirect activities. And these activities are important in delivering nature-based solutions, but they don't necessarily directly work with nature. So it could be kind of smart tech solutions, monitoring solutions, financial services, but also research, education, and innovation, and advisory services. Of course, community engagement is very important in the implementation of nature-based solutions as well. So then, just a few examples of nature-based enterprises. So first one that would fall under the green building category is Helix Pflanzen, which is kind of a company that implements all kind of like living green roofs, facades, walls, interior greening. And in this community, kind of the main benefit is kind of to reduce the pollution, urban heat island effect, and increase biodiversity. Here you see one of their projects, which is kind of a green facade on a parking garage. And then another one, which is an indirect kind of nature-based enterprise, is Treemania. So Treemania works with kind of smart technologies. So they use satellite imagery, but also spatial tools, but also environmental sensors, and kind of virtual reality to kind of better help understand, monitor, and manage nature-based solutions, and sometimes also to reconnect citizens to nature. So I think they also work with a Twitter account of a tree or something. So they have soil sensors by a tree, and then the tree says, oh, my soil moisture is low, can somebody please water me? So that's also kind of an interesting way to engage citizens as well. And then, yes, so how does this look like, kind of this engaging enterprise in the delivery of NBS? So looking at the connecting nature framework again, with the 3 phases: planning, delivery, and stewardship. In the first phase of planning, you could, for instance, think of landscape architects or biodiversity experts, or even kind of community engagement companies. Then in delivery, there could be a specialized horticulture contractor. So for example, what I just showed, Helix Pflanzen would be kind of a delivery contractor. And then in the stewardship phase, it could be kind of a community enterprise take over the management of the nature-based solution. Then just a few words about the kind of the characteristics of nature-based enterprise that we found. So the turnover relatively low. So they're kind of mainly micro enterprises, at least in our sample, were mainly micro enterprises. And we also found that, mainly the private and the public sector are kind of a 50-50 source of turnover. Then the majority of them identifies for-profit or hybrid, and for-profit means that they kind of put their economic goals above their environmental social goals, and hybrid, it's that they kind of put that on the same level. And then of course, non-profits. And then we also found kind of the different types of value they create. So of course, as they mainly deliver nature-based solutions, they deliver economic, environmental, and social value. And kind of the main types that we found here are kind of the economic value would be kind of the skills development, innovation, and job creation. For environmental value would be biodiversity, the kind of the increase in green and blue spaces, or the connectivities of those. And lastly, kind of increase water and air quality. And then social value created is very often related with education and environmental attitudes, empowerment of communities, and improving health and well-being of communities. And all these values have been self-identified. So then if you kind of look through the mission orientation, we found that, obviously environmental goals are generally the most important. They are nature-based enterprises, but these goals, the most important here is that these goals are kind of evidence-based and authentic. So we've spoke with a lot of entrepreneurs that found it quite difficult because they had difficulty with measuring impact, and then can they even claim that they contribute to certain environmental goals? Then secondly, we also found, which was kind of an interesting finding for us, is that social goals were very often as important actually as environmental goals, and sometimes even necessary to deliver on the environmental mission. So the social goals would very much include creating public awareness, but also empowerment of local communities. And yeah, they very much, as I said before, they really contribute to delivering these environmental goals. Then we found that financial goals were very much linked to impact. So it wasn't really, so even the companies that said they were for profit, they very much would say, I'm only for profit so I can make more impact on my social and environmental goals. So that's kind of a nuance there. And then lastly, which is probably one of the most important ones, we found that they very much wanted to change an industry for the better as well. So they are very much working to facilitate systems change or transition, and they also engage kind of in lobby activities, etc., to enable this change. So that was quite interesting. But then, who is kind of the nature-based entrepreneur? We found that they are generally quite from kind of a technical environmental background, and therefore they sometimes lack kind of business knowledge. So that was kind of a tricky one as well. And then we found that the main barriers for them are the kind of the finance and the lack of knowledge related to research and development of kind of their products and services, but also, and that's, I think the main barrier is still kind of the measuring impact and effectiveness of MBS. And then what they would see as an enabler is kind of, having connections with peers and learning from others and learning from best practices, but also kind of support measures such as capacity building and training. And then on to external barriers. So those are kind of the barriers that are from outside the organization. So it's more kind of the landscape in which the enterprise operates in. And we kind of found them in these 6 different categories. So we found them in like political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal regulatory. And just to say, nature-based solutions is of course a relatively new concept, and there's a highly fragmented market. So even those sectors that I presented before, these economic activities, there's a huge difference in that, of course, but these are kind of the general factors that we found. And we found that generally the kind of the political, economic, and legal regulatory were found to be the most challenging. So if you look at the political ones, it would mainly focus on kind of inconsistent public policies or the lack of policies. Then for legal and regulatory, I think the most significant one was definitely the lack of industry standards. And we hear this a lot with MBS as well. Of course, it is very difficult to kind of define that. And then lastly, the kind of the economic barriers would be focusing on kind of this general lack of funding, but also there's just no alignment with private investors and business supports, because these kind of enterprises and nature-based solutions itself are very different in nature than conventional projects they would fund. And then if we look at enablers, so political leadership, of course, one of the main enablers, which includes, of course, MBS awareness, but also kind of policy support. And then there would also kind of the focus would also be support instruments, but also industry networks and collaborations, and platform technologies were kind of found as enablers. And this is just to say is kind of in line with the internal barriers that we found. So very much capacity building measures and the need for knowledge, training, and skill development is very much there. So very quick words on this, because I see I'm almost running out of time. So how to support nature-based entrepreneurship. We published this guidebook on how to support nature-based enterprises. So I'll put the link in the chat later so you can take a look at that. But just a few examples of things that happen in Connecting Nature. So there's one city that created a nature-based accelerator, one that delivered skills and training, very much focused on delivering the MBSs that they had planned in their city. And then there's the Connecting Nature Enterprise platform. So very quickly about this. So world's biggest platform for nature-based enterprises, and it's for suppliers, buyers, innovators, policymakers, practitioners, basically everybody working for and with nature-based solutions. And kind of the aim of this platform is to further develop the sectors by sharing knowledge and resources and by connecting people. These are the communities very much overlapping with the sectors I presented before. 350 enterprises now and 2,100 members. And I have to say that it's still in a beta version, but we have the launch of the new platform in early 2023. And then there's just very quickly referencing the acknowledgements, and that's it for me. I hope I didn't use up too much time on that. And thank you for your attention. Let me just...
Thank you, Esme. You were perfect on the timing.
Perfect.
Really, no, thank you for this presentation, for this really in-depth overview of some of the key characteristics of these nature-based enterprises. Who are the entrepreneurs? What do they do? What are the barriers that they encounter? And personally, I have a lot of questions for you. I imagine also many of the participants do. So I really invite them to write them in the chat, and we will pick them up either later on or in the thematic sessions. I also invite everybody to have a look at the platform and maybe subscribe to the platform that Esme described, because it's really a great networking opportunity, and many of you in their expectations for this Policy Business Forum explain to us that also networking is important, and knowing what other nature-based enterprises do is important to them. So let's now move on. Let's move on from the description of this complex landscape of nature-based enterprises to the topic of how can these enterprises ensure that they are able to deliver high-quality nature-based solution. And to this aim, I'm very honored to welcome our next speaker, Dorsa Sheikh-Oleslami, from the International Union for the Conservation of Nature in Gland, Switzerland, so close to where we are. So Dorsa holds a Master of Science in Environmental Engineering from the University of Tehran in Iran. Before moving to Switzerland, Dorsa worked as an environmental engineer working on watershed management, water quality monitoring, and trend analysis. In 2020, she started working with the IUCN Global Ecosystem Program, where her responsibilities included the coordination and technical support of the IUCN Global Standard on Nature-Based Solutions and its pilot project. She then joined the Secretariat of the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, and in May 2021, she resumed her engagement with UCN as NBS Program Officer. So, Dorsa, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much, and hello to you all again. Esme, it was a great presentation. There are some synergies with the points that I want to share, but since you did a great job of covering the main barriers, I will keep them short. And I would like to take this chance to bring in a little bit of that global political view also into this conversation, because right now many of the conferences of the parties are happening, like the Convention on Wetlands. The Climate COP is supposed to finish as of today with the discussions, and later on we will have the Convention on Biological Diversity. These are very important because the targets and the agreements that are set within these frameworks will inform the national policies and directly will inform the climate and biodiversity targets of the private sector. So with this short intro, let me share my screen. Okay, so very briefly about IUCN. As Anna said, the International Union for Conservation of Nature is a membership union that has the engagement of around 100 countries, 25 indigenous people and local communities, and overall brings in together around 1,500 different actors and groups that are working very hard on conservation and sustainability. IUCN has different regional and national offices, and also has 3 different commissions that brings in together the technical and scientific community together to work on identify, find solutions and communicate on sustainability issues. This has led IUCN to do some of key nature conservation tools. I'm sure you've all heard about the red list of species, which tracks the status of our habitats and also the status of the species going on. We have the green list, and we have IUCN's global standard on nature-based solutions. That is why IUCN has been on the front line of the development of conservation and this dilemma that we've been having between conservation and the development sector. These are very important because nature-based solutions was developed based on our experiences, the lesson learned and the mistakes that have been going on for decades. Now, there were some points at time that development were overpassed conservation that led into possible overexploitation of resources, the crisis with the loss of species that we have right now, and the climate change. And there were some conservation activities that held back development and injured and risked societies. However, right now we are at the place that we know we cannot just focus on one and forget the other, and we need to bring both conservation and development together. This was reflected also in 2016 study that was done by the Stockholm Resilience Center, going through the Sustainable Development Goals. And as you can see here, we have the 3 pillars of sustainability: nature, society, and economy. We see that nature is underpinning society and economy. You cannot have a healthy society, a thriving economy, if your natural ecosystems are not functional and healthy. However, the importance of economy was also brought again to our attention last year to a very important report that was produced and published by Dr. Dasgupta. And it was the topic of many ongoing conversations across different sectors, not just conservation. We know that economy is also the center of society and nature. That is the core of nature-based solutions, providing actions for the benefit of people and society together. Going back a little bit, so the term nature-based solutions was first introduced by IUCN in 2009. Then with the attention that it gained, IUCN felt the necessity of adopting a formal definition. This is a little bit rare in the conservation community to have a defined resolution. It was a very great step forward to make sure that we are staying away from misuse. Then IUCN and the European Commission worked together with developing the Horizon 2020 programs. And afterwards, IUCN also felt the need that maybe a definition will not address all of the necessities, and the global standard was developed. Just refreshing our memory about the definition of nature-based solutions, we had the pleasure this year to, let me just move this cursor a little bit, to have the definition of nature-based solutions that is adopted through a United Nations mechanism. It's very important because we have definitions about NBS. However, now with UNEO definition, this definition was adopted this March at the 5th United Nations Environment Assembly. Now we can all focus on this definition and join our forces for developing the necessary tools and taking the necessary actions. So according to this definition, the UNEL definition, nature-based solutions are defined as, and the wording is important because this will inform the standards from now on. These are actions to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use, and manage natural or modified terrestrial, freshwater, coastal, and marine ecosystems, which address social, economic, and environmental challenges effectively and adaptively, while simultaneously providing human well-being, ecosystem services and resilience, and biodiversity benefits. The UNEL definition is largely based on IUCN's definition. As you can see, the highlighted, the bolded, underlined wordings are the ones that are from the UNEL definition, but are not included in IUCN's definition. And it brings in the perspective of the European Commission with the definition that they have on nature-based solutions. So this was fantastic news. Okay, so we talked about the definition, and since 2016, nature-based solutions have been creating this traction on policy, on practice in the scientific community. However, this is the challenge with all of the terms and the new concepts that are out there. There is a potential for misuse. That is why, and also we also need a common framework for the different stakeholders with different languages that they use to talk to each other and be able to discuss, to compare, and to exchange. That led IUCN into developing the global standard on nature-based solutions. This took 2 years for the standard to be developed. It went through 2 rounds of rigorous public consultation, collected input from more than 800 technical and scientific experts and policymakers, worked through 9 experts group. And the outcome of this consultation was a standard with 8 criteria and 28 indicators. You can use this standard. It's a facilitative standard to support transitioning into MBS. You can use it for design, monitoring, implementation, and evaluation of your interventions. And this standards focuses on right now 7 major societal challenges. Again, nature-based solutions is bringing all conservation actions, some of the development actions under an umbrella concept, and is supposed to improve them. That is why I'm highlighting this here again, because this is one of the main topics that are the core of the negotiations that are happening right now, and then will be passed on to the practical level too. Nature-based solutions brings in ecosystem-based approaches and adds to them with the sustainability aspects that you need to take into consideration to make sure your intervention is sustainable at design, at implementation, and at the monitoring and long-term life cycle part of your project and intervention. So then this standard was piloted in different thematic areas and in different countries. So what is the standard? The standard, as I mentioned, has 8 criteria and 28 indicators. For the sake of time, I can go on talk about this for hours, but I'm going to stay at the indicator level. First, you need to identify your societal challenge as an entry point to start the conversation and the assessment on your intervention. Then you go to design at scale. Your intervention, so the standard is designed in a way to focus on projects and interventions on the ground. So your intervention needs to be informed by scale, but this is not just the geographical level. You need to think about the economics, the cultural and the social context of your intervention, and not just the intervention site, but you need to go beyond it. These are all the lessons learned from decades of conservation actions and interactions with the development sector and policymakers. Then we have criterion 3, 4, 5, which are the 3 pillars of sustainability: biodiversity net gain, economic feasibility, inclusive governance. So if you're, according to IUCN standard, if your intervention does not at least maintain or add to the level of biodiversity within your site and beyond it, you cannot consider it as a nature-based solution. We have projects that are inspired by nature and derived from nature. However, here we want to give something back to nature too. Your project needs to be economically feasible. This means that you need to think about economics and viability of your project from a financial aspect, even after your intervention ends. This is especially very important because with the funding cycles that many of us are working on, especially this is targeted for the conservation sector. We are used on working with 3 to 5 years of funding. These are the cycle. However, the nature takes longer. For example, with the restoration projects, you sometimes need 10 years, 15 years at least to be able to see outcomes and measure impact. And with inclusive governance, you need to bring in all your stakeholders that are affected by the project into the conversations, into the conversation when you're designing, when you're implementing, and when you're monitoring your project. This also helps you the necessary information you need for a perfect design and to be able to do the adaptive management, which is criterion 7. Then balancing trade-off, no solution is perfect. There are some losses and there are some gains. So you need to study these possible trade-offs well and be prepared to have mitigation actions. Also, we have adaptive management, which urges you to continue learning from your project as you're doing the implementation and stay in touch with the stakeholders throughout your project to be able to identify risks and manage them, and also identify opportunities and synergies. Then we also added the 8th criterion, mainstreaming for sustainability, which urges people to communicate about their interventions to make sure that nobody reinvents the wheel, and that all the lessons learned are the successful stories and the stories that did not deliver as they were hoped to is out there. So if I'm going to start designing an intervention, I can go back and build on what's already been out there. So what does the standard look like? We have the criteria and the standard itself that I briefly touched on. Then we have a guidance that also helps understand the logic behind the nature-based solutions, the development of the standard, and also the logic behind each of the criteria and the indicators. This standard is also accompanied by an assessment tool that helps you understand, know the answers. We have the guiding questions that you can ask yourself and then provide some metrics, some baselines about how to rate your intervention for each of the indicators. However, as I mentioned, this standard is a global standard. It's generic because it's supposed to be applicable to different thematic areas, to different sectors, to different parts of your intervention. What are the next steps? We need to focus on capacity building, as Esme said, with the community of practice, with the private sector. One of the challenges is that they are aware of the technical matters and the national standards. We need to make sure that we can take this capacity into scale to achieve true nature-based solutions. So we require reports and analyses. We need sector-specific thematic guidelines. We need compendium of tools for the different stages of the project. And also we need to establish communities of practice for exchange and flow of information. IUCN has been active on this. The European Commission, through various programs that they have in specific, the Horizon programs, colleagues are doing fantastic works on providing reports, establishing that communication, developing tools, and mapping typologies of MBSS on a scientific and technical level. However, we also need to be sure that our interventions are nature-based solutions. This is especially very important for the private sector, for the financial institutions, to make sure the project that they want to invest in, it's true nature-based solution. That's why it's important to establish certification schemes. IUCN is working on third-party certifications, partnering up with other existing certifications like the gold standard to make sure that this happens fast and a high quality. We need to do resource mobilization. Funding is a problem, especially the funding cycle, as I mentioned before. We need to maybe rethink that, especially for restoration projects. We need longer periods of funding, and also to make sure that intervention lasts after the project implementation is closed. And I have it here on the fourth level. However, this is, I would say, the most important one: international cooperation and partnership. We need this, as you saw, the criteria of the standard. You cannot just be a conservationist and achieve that. You cannot just be an economist and achieve that. It requires a group effort. You need to start talking to different sectors, receive inputs to make sure that you have all the sustainability aspects taken into consideration. Examples of these are the Horizon 2020 Clearinghouse and NetworkNature projects. Clearinghouse is focusing on urban nature-based forestry, and is a collaboration between Europe and China, and NetworkNature that was introduced by Victoria, brings in different actors. Outcome of this, one of the main outcomes of the knowledge products that have been produced, like the knowledge briefs and the fact sheets. There is a database of research and innovation projects. We desperately need successful cases of nature-based solutions in different thematic areas. This is a perfect place to go to, and we will follow up by a knowledge brief, by a knowledge database that goes beyond just the projects, but brings in all the guidelines, useful papers, reports, and other types of information. For the sake of time, and since it was also introduced by Esme, I'm just going to highlight that last week a knowledge brief was produced through and published through NetworkNature on ensuring the high quality of nature-based solutions. An analysis of the top potential misuses of MBS is outlined there. As you can see, greenwashing is on top of the list. That's why assurance is specifically very important at this stage. We have biodiversity offsets and the concerns with marginalization of the vulnerable communities, indigenous people, and local communities are also highlighted there. And this report also outlines the priority elements for MBS standardization, which is defining of MBS monitoring and the evaluation study. Impact assessment is also one of the top challenges that we are facing right now. We need a common framework to be able to impact and report on it and to be able to compare. Thank you very much. I'm here if you have any questions, and also you can contact me through email after the session. Thanks.
Thank you, Dorsa, for your presentation. It was very dense, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions concerning the standards, their implementation, these certification schemes, and what are the implications of the use of these schemes. And but also even the last slides with all this very important information on stakeholder views on, what is a good quality NBS and what's not, and so on. So in interest of time, because we are already a little late, I will now give the floor to Victoria, who will present to you the next phase of the thematic session and of the breakout rooms, where you will have the opportunity to also ask questions to the presenters.
Yes, thanks, Anna. Right, so now that we've had great input from Esme and Dorsa, we want to get into a conversation with you and discuss with each other some questions around those topics and to share experiences. And to do that, we'll split up in smaller groups because that's just easier to get a discussion going. You don't have to do anything. You will be assigned those groups and you will be sort of switched virtually into that room. Before we go into the rooms, I'll briefly present how these thematic sessions will look like so you know what to expect. So as I said, we'll have breakout rooms. We'll have 2 breakout rooms to split up the whole group of participants. And for each group, we look at the same questions. And we have 3 core questions we will look at. So we'll look at 3 questions now. And we also, as Anna mentioned, we have 2 blocks. So after this block, there will again be presentations and thematic sessions, and those will have 3 questions as well. So the setup of the thematic sessions is the same in both books. We will have 2 moderators in this case, and a note taker. And also just to let you know up front that we want to share then coming back to the bigger room, so to speak, altogether. We want to share what we've discussed in the groups and sort of to keep that brief, short and sweet. We're looking for one sort of key take-home message. And it would be nice if you could have someone to volunteer from each of the 2 breakout rooms. So you can think about that. But if there are no volunteers, we will be, of course, be happy to take that on. So those are the more housekeeping things. And now to the actual questions. So with this thematic session, we're focusing on capacities and especially of the private sector and related to upscaling. So, the presentations touch briefly on that, but we really would like to get a bit more in depth in the discussions to see what capacities are lacking and what capacities, especially relating to the upscaling. So what capacities are missing currently that are hindering the upscaling of NBS. Then to see who actually has the possibility to build these capacities and how can they build? Can they be built? And of course, this will be many aspects we related. So do you have any priorities? What would you start with if you would need to choose? That was also touched upon already in the presentations regarding policies, mechanism, and resources. So if we now know what the gaps are and we have capacities that can be built, but again, what sort of are the bigger policies, mechanisms, and resources that could help overcome these capacity gaps? Again, what we're really looking for is to overcome the capacity gaps to support the upscaling of NBS. So we want to go bigger and better. So those are the 3 questions that we'll be discussing in each thematic session. What we'll also do is we will copy the questions into the chat so you can have a look at them again and sort of have them on the side so you know what we're discussing. And we will have time now until 10:25 to discuss together. Then we'll go back to the big room, so to speak, together for 5 minutes to do a bit of reporting. And then we'll have a break before we start with the second block. So it's coming. Okay. Anna, anything you want to add before we go into the rooms?
No, I guess we are ready to go, and I'm looking forward to discuss with you all in the rooms.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I see some people are already back to the big room. I think we're still waiting. Yeah, no, many people are back actually. Okay, good.
So we are all back now, and so we have our two rapporteurs that will synthesize in really few minutes before we take a virtual coffee break the key take-home message from their thematic discussions. So on our side, we had Catherine. Do you want to begin?
Sure, I can start. So we covered a lot of topics, including legislation, education, knowledge, upscaling, procurement. The message which I would take from this discussion was that it's a lot about attitude. So the idea that we have the methods, but we don't necessarily have the willingness yet to implement them because we lack a little bit the assertiveness that these methods are valuable alternatives to the conventional or more technical measures. That's what I would take away as key message. Please add if you see there's something missing, but.
Thank you, Catherine. I don't know if somebody else wants to add from the breakout. I mean, it was a really interesting discussion, very well moderated by Juliette, and we will also, come back to you all with the synthesis of these discussions anyway in a later stage. So maybe going now to the other thematic session, who is the rapporteur?
Yes, I was volunteered by Joanne to be the note taker and rapporteur, and we had two main takeaways. I think on one hand, it was that there seems to be a lack of knowledge or awareness, and also capacities for specific business streams, especially construction companies that would be implementing NBS. And one solution that was mentioned was that small NBS enterprises with the possibility of public funding can serve as catalysts to in their work with larger enterprises and companies. The second point to take away was that there needs to be profitability and risk reduction in NBS for larger enterprises to take up NBS measures, and this could be by publicly funded, demonstrated NBS success stories, or also capacity building and awareness raising through the projects that are currently going on. If I've missed anything, please feel free to add.
All right, thank you, Janana. This was a very also good couple of take-home messages. So I think it's really time now for a break. So good morning again, and welcome back, everyone. So to the second half of our Policy Business Forum. So as time is ticking and there is really some interesting presentations waiting for us, I will immediately give the floor to our first presenter. This session is focused on experiences from private companies implementing nature-based solution and from reinsurers as well. So we will begin with the experience of Geneva River renaturation projects presented by Nathalie Nissen. Nathalie is an engineer from the University of Liège in Belgium and Denmark Technical Institute, with about 20 years of international experience. She brings a creative, systemic and cross-functional expertise. She currently holds a position of continuous improvement manager at Firmenich, focusing on transversal project with safety and environment impact and contributing to the company roadmap to meet its environmental targets. Nathalie just finished a CAS in sustainable development at the University of Geneva with the completion of a project, a capstone project on river renaturation and vegetated roofs. And so she will present the results of this project. Nathalie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. So I will share my screen. Okay, so I will talk about the study that I've done in nature-based solutions.
I'm not sure we see your screen, sorry.
Okay, let me check again. Share. Do you see it?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I said I will talk about the project that I've done in the context of the CAS in sustainable development at the University of Geneva. I focused on two areas of NBS. One is the river renaturation and the other is the green roofs, vegetated roof. And for this, I will focus only on the river renaturation experience in Geneva. So first, the context, we talk about Geneva. So this is a picture of the area I focused on, looking at Switzerland, but also at all the cross-border interactions, and looking at why this is important. First of all, this is the climate impact for daily temperature in Geneva today, in this period of 2020 to 2049. As projected by the territory. And what we see is that by the end of the century, it will be much stronger in this area. And we also see that the areas closer to the water or closer to green areas are the coolest. And that's why we focus on those areas which have a bioclimatic importance with blue and green spaces. And this had been understood actually by the canton of Geneva. And we looked in particular at river renaturation. So what it is, it's the restoration of water storage and transport structures. That means extending floodplains, for example, connecting rivers, creating water ponds or wetlands, remandering rivers. And it also includes the modification done to the environment around the river. And the purpose is to enhance the water storage and have a better management of the water and reduce also the flood risk that we have in the canton. So we have multiple benefits linked to this river renaturation. One is the cycle and the water purification with the creation of ponds, streams, and improved groundwater. We also have improvement of flood and soil protection, climate regulation through the lake and the rivers acting as carbon sink. We have also an impact on biodiversity with the conservation of biodiversity in rivers and also on the riverbanks. And it also has a cultural and landscape benefit and well-being. What we see in the canton is most of these projects have actually been initiated, first of all, to protect from flood risk. If we look at the dynamic of the river renaturation projects in Geneva, and we look back almost a century ago, or more than a century ago, we already had a problem of agricultural overexploitation, urbanization, and deforestation, and we had an increase of flood. And the the solution that we had at the time was to create dams and to channel the rivers, because the objective then was that we had to domesticate or to dominate nature, and that's how they wanted to prevent flood risk. What we saw is that by doing that, we actually had more pollutant release. It increased the floods that we had in the area, with floods that were even more drastic, and it also disturbed the hydraulic regime, and we had some erosion of the land. So there was a lot of mobilization in the city through different associations, and one of them was Coordination Rivière, which is an association of 15 different associations that have written a manifesto for the rivers in 1990, really claiming that we had an issue in the area and mobilizing the society to act upon it. After that, we had a lot of institutionalization at all public levels. First, we had at the Geneva canton level, that was in the 90s, the creation of an agency for the lake, renaturation and water courses and fishing. We also had cross-border with neighborhood France, so cross-border water community institution. Some things were done also at the cantonal office for water and at the federal level later on. So in the meantime, we also had centennial floods of different rivers and multiple droughts. But 6 four-year programs were implemented between 1998 and next year, including the participation of many companies and also farmers, private owners, and NBS companies that actually did the work. So engineers, landscapers, biologists that did the implementation of those programs. So the achievement is that it's about more than 100 projects with 200 million Swiss francs funding. And the achievement is that the rivers were de-channeled, with also the demolition of some harbors and some walls, the widening of rivers' natural delta, in some cases doubling or tripling the riverbed length. We also had native plantations, creation of reed beds, creation also of wet and marshy areas, removal of migration barriers for the fish as well, flood protection, and including also access for the public, for walking, for cycling, and also for resting. So we already have improved water quality. The biodiversity in some areas is very, I will show you a picture right afterwards. It's very obvious. And we also have those places for relaxation and leisure and protection against flood. And those benefits go both for the fauna and the flora and also for the population. So this started mainly in the 80s, 90s with the civil warning and the mobilization of many associations. In 97, the law on water was modified in Geneva to include the river renaturation. We also benefited from a cantonal fund for renaturation with 6 to 10 million Swiss francs that were invested in those projects per year. So it's nearly 200 million Swiss francs in the last 20 years. These funds were supplied by hydraulic royalties, pumping taxes, and subsidies from the Confederation, and also some private donations, and the creation of an agency for the river and renaturation under the Department of the Territory. In 2011, so more than 10 years afterwards, the Swiss Federation also changed the law to protect water, and that was voted at the federal level. And now they even have done in the last 2 years a standardized control of renaturation effect, and I will talk more in depth about it afterwards. We also had this cross-border water community that existed since '95, but in 2016 they signed a binding memorandum to protect water resources and restore waterways. So not only on the Swiss land, but also in France, because we actually share all these rivers. Most of them have run across both countries. And then
there are 2 minutes left. I'm sorry.
Okay. And then flood protection is done thanks to these projects. So this is a picture of what it is in an example of the river renaturation. And I will just talk about this project that we've done with the company I work for, with Firmenich. So it's a public and private partnership that has started in 2014 because we had a flood risk that was assessed. So we did many studies and the project is 12 million Swiss francs. So it's the first thing is to build a wall to protect against flood. And then we also have all the renaturation aspects, which are here along the river. So it's a mix of a gray and green solution. And we actually have a assessment done by the Science Based Target for Nature to highlight this and assess this nature-based solution project. And some of the key drivers and barriers, so the most important that I've seen in implementing the NBS, so the policy frameworks we have at the cantonal and Swiss level, we have the laws, but we also have standardized control for revitalization of water courses that include controls, standardized indicators, best practice sharing, data management, and financial modeling. In terms of barriers, it's actually the NBS cover many topics, so it's sometimes difficult to see which law is applicable, if it's the biodiversity, water protection, the natural hazard risk prevention, etc. So, and the coordination can be difficult, and also the cross-border coordination. Even though if there is a will to do it, the implementation itself is quite difficult. In terms of capacity building, that's the second aspect. Where they had, for most of the river renaturation, the same consortium or the same group of companies that work on these projects. So they've really built internal knowledge, and they also dare to implement techniques that are more daring, like diamond shape technique to imitate natural riverbed construction. But the barriers are the long-term cost effectiveness, the maintenance costs, and the remained focus on cost. In terms of responsibilities, the project that I showed you for that is done with my company, it's shared between the state and private company, with 70% funded by the state and 30% by the private company. What's really important is to have the key stakeholders, which are the right people at the right place, and that really helps the project. And the barriers is that there is a continued effort to actually coordinate those projects. There was no implication of insurance company, and the long-term maintenance responsibilities and actions are quite difficult to assess. This is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathalie. Thank you so much for this presentation. And I don't know if you can stop sharing the screen, maybe. And I think you really touched on some of the topics that we will address also in the discussion later on, responsibility, liabilities, and many of the challenges that you faced and the companies that you interviewed faced when they were implementing these river renaturation projects. But on the same, let's say, kind of fil rouge, we have now Annalise Denis from Agence Terre Paris in France, that will present her experience of working as an architect engineer, and also with emphasis on the opportunities and challenges faced by her company. So Annalise is trained as an architect at University of Leuven in Belgium, where she also completed her studies with Master of Human Settlement and of Urbanism and Strategic Planning. After conducting some years of research by design on urbanism and architecture with a focus on Vietnam and Zanzibar, Annalise joined the Landscape Urbanism Office Agence Terre in Paris in 2013. She's mostly involved in territorial approaches and strategic design investigations at the edge between landscape development and urban growth. She continues teaching design studios in parallel at both the University of Leuven and the School of Arts in Ghent. The floor is yours, Annelies. Thank you, and sorry if my pronunciations were probably all wrong.
No, it's perfect. Thank you, Anna. I hope you can see my screen. Yes. Do you see the right one now, or is it a mix up with both screens?
Yeah, we see the next slide too.
Yeah, okay.
Not a big deal, but it's too complex for you to change.
No. I will make it happen. I just need 1 second then. It's always the issue with having two screens connected.
Exactly.
I think this might work better, right? Yes. Perfect.
Thank you.
Here we go. It's better to see a full screen. So thank you for the introduction. I will actually share my experience from working as a landscape architect or designer. And when we see how nature-based solutions are actually worked out in practice, we, as in our office of Agence Terre, we work on 3 types of interventions that help to identify in the first place, but also implement these nature-based solutions in territories at risks. And I will show examples of each of those. So we do territorial studies, and that's mostly to really look at the landscape logics, identify where possibilities and problems occur. And so really try to build up some strategies. While we also have, of course, the second one, the public space design, so where we have actual interventions to respond to nature's challenges. This can be of very different types. And then the third one is where we, and that's something we do as an office. I don't think every office does it, but we like to work also on spatial guidebooks to give lessons learned or ideas to communities, politicians, and so on. And of course, each of those have challenges and opportunities. So if we start with the territorial studies, I'm not going to go through all of the examples, but for us, like I said, it's really about starting from the large scale strategy to look at, as what Natalie was just saying before, sometimes it's cross-territorial, cross-country, and so on. It's really important for us to start to understand the landscape system in order to define an NBS that can be appropriate on different scales. I've listed some examples of Agence Terre, but I will only show you, of course, one. And this is one in Rennes, in Brittany, in France, where we looked at a territory which was linked to a valley of more than 22 kilometers on the territory of the city of Rennes, but which we looked at, of course, in the wider context, and then started to develop a system that was, of course, a landscape structure, but then also a structure for educational purposes, more recreational purposes, and so on and so forth. And so we really focused also on the public spaces on the river's edge, but in a logic where the river would be renatured, would have more space actually to develop and so on. Which was very important is that this process has been going on since 2014 actually, and it's almost concluding. So it's a really long process because we are doing this in dialogue with the politicians, the local stakeholders, the inhabitants, and so on, because it's by knowing their stories and experiences of the territory that we can also formulate more adapted responses, actually. And so this is really a strategy to structure a floodable territory, and we try to give direction with our large-scale visions, but also at the same time try to look for opportunities that can create more urban concentrations and etc. So it's not only the landscape strategy, but we also see it in dialogue with all of the other issues. And I can also think about the mobility and so on. And of course, nature conservation is a very important aspect. And so in these type of studies, what we really think are important challenges to highlight is that even though we formulate a vision, we've been working on it for 8 years almost, it's something that's still not a strict policy document, but they stay visions. So what do we need is really strong political support and really people that are carrying it on after we leave as designers to be able to realize things on the terrain. In the case of Rennes, it really worked well and the things are being implemented. And of course, it's a very complex thing because you have a myriad of actors, I think, in each and every territorial study that we do. Of course, on the other hand, it's a very big opportunity to work on that scale and to try to formulate a vision for a territory, because this large-scale approach can offer more strategic solutions instead of separate project investigations on the smaller scale. I think that's my main message for these big ones. If then we go a scale below, so the public space design is where we, at Agence Terre at least, work mostly for now in the floodplains and the valleys. And so there's loads of them that we have. I will show two different ones. One is, both of them are in the Paris region. This is in Carrières-sous-Poissy, where we have a park that we called Parc du Peuple de l'Herbe. So it's a park for insects. That's how we called it. It used to be a brownfield, very, very polluted industrial site along the river. And so the city decided to transform it into a public space, but a natural public space. Big concern is, of course, so here you see it along the river, you have all of the houses on the opposite edge. And then you have on the edge of the village there, actually a big space that could be developed, but they wanted it to be a nature park. Of course, first challenge, how can we solve actually the whole polluted thing? We could have just scraped off the top layer, let's say, and brought up a lot of earth, but we decided to do it through planting. And so the planting is really chosen very precisely to actually repurify the soil and to make it into an area that can be accessible as a park. Same thing happens. So here's some pictures of the realization of the riverbanks. So it's really been an ecological design process where we worked, of course, with a lot of experts as well, but where we try to, instead of the really industrial edge, create something that's much more natural, that can also help with the planting to restabilize the banks, avoid erosion, and so on and so forth. Another challenge is the flood capacity. So we design public spaces that are actually capable in non-flood time to offer really a contact with the water, but then in flood periods, you can see on the picture on the right, it can actually just have a passage and all the rest is basically underwater. So it's designing things that can actually work with both. And then, of course, I'm come back to the ecological design. Here you can see other images. It's really about this wetlands that we create, that we have flourishing in the park. If we look to the challenges, so of course, this is a very site-specific issue. So we cannot just take some abstract norms and rules. It goes with what is the soil over there? How can we work with it? It's about a lot of measures that have to be taken really locally and so on. So that's really important in our design processes. And also, as I explained, the depollution of the site, it's a process rather than a quick fix. We cannot just plan something and think that the next week it will be solved. So it's also convincing people and owners, and so in this case, the city, that this is not always a fast solution. And then, of course, opportunities. So public spaces are more than a technical solution. It becomes a living environment really for the inhabitants and nature alike. I have a second one. I will go quicker. This is another park next to the Seine River as well. But here we worked a lot about flooding and public spaces. So just some images where we actually capture stormwater. We have it in the public space. And we work in that sense on flood resilience, as well from the Seine River as from the rainwater. And we actually made it as the base of our design. It's not just somewhere you have a pond. It's actually, if you see the surface of the park, it's like 80% is based on this water figure. And this becomes also the identity of the space. And that was for us the most important element. And you can see it in the pictures, it becomes really part of the experience of this park. And this is how we work a lot of times to design our public spaces. So this is also a bit what I formulated here. So it's a base for the entire concept of the park public space. And so recently it's becoming more and more applied. So for us, it's a way also to show nature-based solutions in a interesting way to the public. So I think it's an important element also as educational aspect of it. And then a last part is about what I said about these guidebooks. And for us, it's important also to disseminate our experience as landscape designers to the wider public. And we did it in several projects. And one of them is a guide for wetlands, or how to integrate wetlands in an urban project. And it's actually, first of all, for all of the politicians in one region. This was Bordeaux in France. But of course, this can also serve for others. And then we made, of course, a lot of drawings, because that's what we like to do, but that can explain it in an easy and accessible way. Like the opportunities, also having like a chart to follow, like how can different choices be made, always from a spatial point of view. So we take all of the technical knowledge that we have and we bring it into spatial design, let's say, guidelines. So there's different drawings and so on that go with it, and that actually bring us into, or that are assembled in a booklet, let's say, for different or various public. So the challenges here is that we have, with these documents, we have to try to reach the right people. So not only designers, but also the politicians, the people that are responsible for certain territories and so on. It has to be inspiring, yet scientifically correct. So we have to always have being backed up by a lot of engineers and so on. So at least everything is working and correct. And sometimes we are challenging a little bit the current practices and rules with that. So that's sometimes not evident for others to imply or to apply these design proposals that we give. And then the opportunities, of course, is that we bring it into an inspirational document. So it's spatial opportunities that we show. And then by showing possibilities, we think that we can, or we hope that we can open some eyes of decision makers, and that we can help to build a change in this whole approach. And I will leave it here, and I'm happy to discuss further later on.
Thank you, Annelise, so much for this presentation that made us really understand a little bit more how it is the everyday life of an architect engineer, and what are the challenges, the opportunities there. And I'm looking forward also for the thematic sessions where there will be other enterprises, companies, and we can share and compare experiences. So now we are going towards the third inputs and presentation of this second session. We have the honor to have with us Hélène O'Brien from Swiss Re, Zurich, Switzerland. She will discuss about the role of insurance to protect natural assets and enable more nature-based solutions. Hélène is the sustainability lead for corporate partnership in Swiss Re, and also Swiss Re liaison delegate to the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. She's an experienced leader of business transformations, including the expansion of Swiss Re operations in Africa and the setup of sustainability-focused practices within the corporate partnership unit. Welcome, Hélène, and what is your...
Thanks a lot, Anna. So I'll just share my screen. Let me know when you can see it.
We do.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and also to hear the examples before. It's very good when you work in the finance industry to hear kind of the real world, how these things are applied. So over these few minutes, I'll share a bit the role of insurance, also what Swiss Re is, and share a few examples too about how we've used insurance in the nature-based solutions area, and really with the goal of scaling this and enabling this to get bigger. So first on Swiss Re, so we're a reinsurance company. And for those of you who don't know, because it's a bit of an abstract industry, so the reason for our existence is that sometimes risks are just so huge that you do need to have this diversification. So there are companies like Swiss Re There's only a few in the world. We're one of the largest, where we take risk at a global scale from many different places, and that enables the buffer. And what I mean by that is, when we often think about insurance, the whole reason for its existence is to create this buffer within society, so that when costs go very high, for instance, after a hurricane, that societies can go forward, that insurance can absorb that. And with this, I can give some examples. So recently we had the Hurricane Ian, which is a quite extensive one that went through America, the US. And the economic cost of that is estimated between 200 and 300 billion. And within that, just 60 to 70 billion is the insured cost. So that means that all of the billions that were there have to be absorbed by the government, a lot by individuals, by small companies. And this is what we refer to as the protection gap. And this is the US. I mean, when we look at what happened in Pakistan earlier this year, it's even more extreme, like, because there's even less insurance cover there. You're talking less than 10, sometimes less than 5% is actually covered. So this is something we want to address. And when we talk about to make the world more resilient, that's what's behind that within our industry. And if I can speak a bit about when we talk about nature-based solutions, and there are three target audiences or target users of this in this context. So the first is with businesses. So if you're a business, many businesses are really dependent on natural assets. So if you think of a furniture company and how dependent they are on wood from forests, in this case, you can use insurance in its very basic essence to, actually insure your product. So insure the wood in the forest. There you have a clear economic value. Additionally, if there's a challenge and you have business interruption, there's also insurance for that. So in this sense, we can really use a very standard old product and just apply it to a natural asset. But for this to happen, the asset needs to have an economic value, which is always the challenge in this space. And in addition, companies like Swiss Re and other insurers, we have this knowledge of risk over time. So we can see, are you dependent on wood that's in an area increasingly susceptible to fires, and also to manage a bit your operations that way. The second group are the investors. And this is quite an important one, because a lot of the projects, and even the ones we've heard of earlier today, I imagine there's a lot of dependence on grants and government funding for these. It's not yet at the scale of being an investment class of its own. And this is something within Swiss Re, we really want to shift that mindset. If we can look at nature-based solutions in infrastructure or in cities, if you can look at those as an asset in themselves and as something that a company would want to invest in, then you can mobilize a lot more financing. And I can speak of an example that speaks to this, I'll share in a moment. And then lastly, another group that's very important are the governments, because as I just mentioned, one of the biggest funders of conservation and restoration, it falls to the governments. And there are ways to use the mechanisms that are in insurance to also help the governments to do that. So to mobilize funds. And I have an example I'll share in a second about this. So these are the three examples here. So the first part, so awareness and identification. As I mentioned, if a company like Swiss Re, 150 years of experience, we have a lot of people who do models, and we also have all of the data from, say, the IPCC reports, also IUCN that we heard from earlier. And when you integrate these internally, what we do when we're allocating insurance or deciding how much a premium is, we use this type of information. And what we're increasingly trying to use also in the nature-based space is that these insights can be used. So for example, if I think about here in Switzerland, we have a lot of these very narrow valleys, and on the sides, there's a lot of forests that are used to actually protect, so against avalanches and mudslides in summer. And these are a built-in insurance, I suppose, from the natural ecosystem. But if you have this kind of awareness, you can see, okay, this forest has actually been damaged by a fire or some other, maybe a large storm. And with this type of information, you can manage your risk into the future. You can see, okay, we are depending on this natural asset. We can see that this natural asset is currently at risk. And then also taking in climate change scenarios, it's going to get worse over time. And if you can use that information, the first step for businesses, governments, and for many different parties, is to build that into their own risk management so that you can start to work either with nature or adapt. So the adaptation point is very important here. And the second example I'll share, so this links to the governments, and I have a good example. So it relates to the coral reefs in Mexico. But just before I mention it, it's important that insurance is just a tool, so you can apply it in any landscape. And in this sense, so in Mexico at the coast, there's a lot of tourism, a lot of people living at the coast, and the storms have damaged the coral reefs off the coast, which are very important to actually reduce the impact of the storm on land. So they're a built-in natural adaptation for the people. And what the problems that they will be feeling locally is that with so many storms coming one after the other, nature didn't have enough time to recoup. And you get into this bad feedback loop that eventually, if you're not helping nature to protect itself and recuperate, that you'll lose the coral reef, and then the town and the tourist industry, everything is really at risk there. So what we did, we worked with, Swiss Re worked with the local government and also the Nature Conservancy to see how we could use insurance products. And in this case, we created a parametric product. What that means is that we pick an indicator like wind speed, because wind speed can be an indication of how strong a storm is. So if the wind speed reaches a certain level, then we know the storm is severe. Then an automatic payout goes to the government. So the local government of Mexico holds the insurance policy. So they get the funds instantly. They don't need to lodge a claim because it's linked to an index, in this case, wind speed. And what happens is as soon as the storm has passed, they use the money, the cash they already have, because cash is always scarce in these periods right after a catastrophe. So they use that cash to pay the local team who go out in their boats and help by replanting and repairing and just helping nature repair itself more quickly so that the coral reefs can become more robust. And I think this is a great example because you can see how it's not just about giving money to something that's already destroyed. You're actually using what you get from the insurance to protect nature. And this is completely agnostic to landscape. So you could apply, in theory, the same thing in a mountain situation. You know, if a forest is damaged and you have an index relating to the wind speed or the fire, for instance, potentially you could bring in the same mechanism. So that's quite interesting there. And then the last example, and what Natalie was sharing earlier was making me think of this as well a little bit. So this relates to also investments. And an example I have is that the Texel Island in the Netherlands, so it's a protected natural area. And there was reparations being done on the dike that was there. And it was a concrete dike before, but they wanted to make it a natural dike with sand and with grass. And the issue, which is really great from a nature-based solution, the co-benefits are huge. But the funny thing with the insurance and the finance industry is that we like to have a lot of experience on all of this construction and engineering before we understand the risk in our terminology. So here we made a concerted effort. We said, okay, this is a nature-based solution. There are huge co-benefits. We want to give insurance to this. So in this case, we gave a construction cover like what we would to if it was concrete. But I think what's important here is to look at these investments not as some niche, something that happens with philanthropic money, but if you see, okay, this dike was actually a very viable infrastructure in itself. It was a good investment. All we had to do was make this little bit more effort to make a model and actually price it correctly. And this is, I think, a challenge that's in our industry, but this is where with insurance and finance companies, if we can get more and more involved at an earlier stage of these construction projects, build up these models, it's going to have its own feedback loop that's quite positive in the future. So that's, yeah, I think that's a big opportunity that we could exploit to enable these nature positive actions. So I think with that, just to wrap up, I think that with insurance, we're kind of the last resort. We absorb the shocks that are there and enable this level of resilience. We like to be involved very early because, you know, with the extent of biodiversity loss and climate change that we're experiencing, the fear that we often have is that if we don't do anything to help resilience now, the risks will be so high in the future, they're uninsurable. And that's not what we want either, I think, also for society. So if we can join conversation early, if we can also do pilot projects like what I mentioned in Texel or in Mexico, then we're very happy to also learn as a company and hopefully enable these nature-based solutions through the products that we have. That's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this very interesting presentation about your work with all the examples. And I'm sure that many of us were not aware of all this example of insurance that you provide and reinsurance that you provide. So it will be interesting to discuss them in the next thematic session that is entitled The Risking Nature-Based Solutions. And now I leave to Victoria to briefly present to you the key questions that we would like to address together in the next session.
Yes, indeed. Okay, you should see.
Yes, we see.
You see my screen now. Good. Again, we'll follow the exact same format for the thematic sessions. We'll have 2 breakout rooms with participants, again, randomly assigned, and we decided to do different groups this time because many of you said that you wanted actually you wanted to network as well. So that's why we decided to do that, so you can have a different group composition, if you will, for the small group. Again, 3 core questions, 2 moderators and a note taker, and also again a take-home message that we will then share in the plenum. That will be the last thing before Anna closes us out for the day. The thematic session 2 is concerned with de-risking NBS. So that's a lot of what we just heard in the presentations. Thank you again to all the speakers as well. It was really interesting examples, and we want to discuss more what the main risks are that are linked to NBS and who could be responsible for such risks. And I think we've already had some examples of what kind of role interest can play. In case something fails regarding an NBS, who's responsible and even liable? So again, what do we do there, and do insurers have a role? And then the last one, so when you talk to designers and constructors, they do have a fear of NBS failing. And that's often related to not having successful reference projects to look back to, or legal standards that you could sort of have as a baseline. And so the question is, what has maybe been put in place to tackle that, or what could be, again, put in place that isn't done yet? And I think now, with further ado, we'll move into the thematic sessions. So I give the clear to Adriana to move us. Thank you.
We have been cut a bit too sudden. Sorry for those in the other thematic session, but we will summarize these thoughts in the final version of the synthesis of this policy business forum. So, but welcome back now, everyone. We have a few minutes left for a quick summary of the take-home message. For this time, we start from thematic session 1. Who is there, the rapporteur in Joanne group? So group moderated by Joanne.
Julia volunteered.
I am. I guess no one is volunteering, right? So, sorry.
Yeah.
I have a problem because I was recording. Okay. Yeah, I think we can summarize in the fact that MBS present a great number of challenges when it comes to their insurance, because, well, first, the evaluation of natural assets works in a different way as with gray measures, with implementation of gray measures. But also it was discussed that with risk management is not only a matter of insurance, but also about knowledge and experience. something that is built with time, and it's a matter of developing techniques and the overall knowledge of nature-based enterprises. I don't know if I summarize it well, if someone wants to add something.
If there's time, I think there would be one point that I might add. I think we all agreed that there's an important role for insurance for the liability issue, and it's really been a lot of hesitation to move there because of all the uncertainties that Julia mentioned. And so I think, there was some thinking of how could we get over that problem with maybe some kind of public-private insurance or some kind of public insurance guarantees, taking a layer of the risk. Okay, speed talks, there were two, sorry.
Thank you, Joanna. This was a very good point, as well as the one raised by Julia. And now we move on with thematic session 2. Alberto.
Indeed, I also may very briefly summarize what we talked about for the main points. So we have talked about that you absolutely, when dealing with nature-based solutions, have to have insurance from both sides, so from the public side and also from the NBE and also constructor side and designer side. So the main taking was insurers are willing to insure NBS, but it might be difficult because there are missing common. So we are missing common metrics, a common system for assessing that performance. So you build up on past experiences with cases, and it's also sometimes difficult to get right into very, very new and innovative measures because this past steps or this build of trust is missing, so it's a higher risk. And it can also be difficult for small companies to get involved into very large projects because then they may have very large liabilities. So one possible solution that was mentioned by Vincent was one could try to make a common framework for assessing the insurance of nature-based solutions with the sharing of information, with building up a matrix, for example. And just get the discussion going with everyone to find common denominators and common information. Hopefully that was it. Anyone wants to add something? This is really briefly from what I took from the discussion.
All right, so I think it's now time to really for some final closing words. I hope you all had a good time in these 3 hours that we spent together, that you all learned something that you didn't know, that you are left with some food for thought in one direction or another. And let me say it was a real pleasure for us to organize this policy business forum. Let me thank the organizing team that made it possible, all these 3 different groups that have been involved, 2 different projects. Let me thank them for, really the hard work behind that. Let me thank the presenters for their insights, for having prepared their presentation so well and taking care of the time and time management, and for giving us some good food and inspiration for the thematic discussion. But and last but not least, let me finally thank you all for attending this event. We will be back to you soon to share the synthesis of the event, to let you add if you have further inputs to what we will be writing and summarizing. And we hope that we will have different ways to continue this discussion on how we can upscale nature-based solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.